Hello and welcome to P04, the practicum lesson about procedural scaffolding and nominating every student. Our question of the day is, how can we use procedural scaffolding in Microteaching 1 to promote output and interaction? So, in the previous practicum class, we discussed a similar question of the day about verbal scaffolding. So today's techniques can and should be incorporated into any of your micro-teaching or future teaching to encourage students to have output and interaction. Objectives for today is you'll be able to review procedural scaffolding techniques in detail. So we'll go over each of those individually with some examples, and it should make them more concrete for you. And the second objective is you'll be able to record a short video of yourselves using some procedural scaffolding techniques. Remember, practicum is a very practical class, so we need lots and lots of teaching practice, and this is a simple task designed to give you just that. And I'll show you in the end with a model of how you can do this using one of 3 contexts for your little mini practice. In this class, you're going to need your notebook, your classroom interactions techniques, which can be found in the front of your Methodology 1 book, and your recording device. Probably most of you are going to use your mobile phones, but you can record yourself using any video recording device that you have, including a webcam. And starting with a quick review of where we have come from in practicum and where we are going. Our last lesson was about verbal scaffolding. Now, verbal scaffolding is this longer list of scaffolding techniques, but they are not unrelated to today's topic, which is procedural scaffolding. Now, let's not get caught up too much in this distinction here. The more important distinction would be knowing the difference between scaffolding, which is about output and interaction, and MICs, which are about making input comprehensible. So those 2 distinctions are more important than this, but some TESOL students will ask the question. So verbal scaffolding in general is more focused on helping students use language. Of course, there's language use happening in every scaffolding technique, but procedural scaffolding is generally more focused on helping students perform a certain classroom procedure. You might have noticed that ThinkPairShare or GroupPairSolo or TSST, they're very much procedural interactions. So they're more about a process. But like I say, not a huge difference at all. There is a lot of overlap between these categories, so don't be confused. Scaffolding is important. It's important that you know what scaffolding is. Procedural verbal, not so much. And our first procedural technique of the day, procedural scaffolding technique, is model to practice. Now, you may have seen this before. An example: teacher models key language before students use it. It's often used in greetings, in question intonation, and so on before a speaking or interaction activity. They need to know how to use the language, so they practice it a bit and then they use it. Now, this is often confused with choral repetition, which is similar but more focused on a quick repeating of some key language rather than practicing it before a task. So apple, repeat after me, apple. You know, that's a little different than modeling, what have you done before? What have you done before? Repeat after me and ask your partners. So it's a little different. And you may have seen this before. You may have seen this before in Welcome Week. For example, in the interactions demonstration, the teacher at a certain point said, okay, repeat after me, who is the best and why? Ask your partner who is the worst and why, and so on. So that was very much designed to get the students interacting so they could perform this task. So that's model to practice. And you've seen it before in your interactions model. In this case, it's a simple greeting. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Ask your partner, good morning, blah, blah, blah. And of course, the classic TSST technique. This is where the teacher asks S1 a question, S1 answers, and S1 asks S2, and S2 answers, and asks S3, and so on. In the description of it, we have teacher S1, S2, and it comes back to the teacher. Often TESOL students ask, does that question have to come back to the teacher in the end? And the short answer is no. That's not obligatory. It can be TSST if it's students asking each other the same question. That could be part of TSST. It could be complete without the teacher. And yes, you can involve 7 students if you want. But I would advise against this, particularly in your microteaching, because TSST is great because it gives students practice asking and answering questions, but it's not so great because it can be very time consuming, so you certainly can't use this every time, but it's a useful technique nonetheless. And you've seen this in your classes. I would say watch for it in our lesson plan models. In the upcoming receptive skills lesson plan model, you can see TSST in the model itself. And yeah, you're welcome to try some of it, but like I say, it can be quite time consuming, so just be careful with your TSST. Another quick review. This is one that is very commonly used in your TESOL classrooms. It's pair work or group work to S1. So essentially you have students talking in pairs or groups first before calling on one student to share the answer. And you've seen it as PW or GW. And of course, the value here, just like many of these interaction techniques, is notice that the students get a chance to practice with their friends before they practice with the whole class. So this will improve the quality of their output when they share, and this will lower their affective filters, so to speak. This will get them speaking in a more comfortable environment than asking them immediately to share with the whole class. Okay, so this is very helpful. Give them a little bit of time to rehearse with their groups. And you may have seen this before in Welcome Week. During the full lesson demonstration, the teacher asked everybody to ask their partners about jobs before calling on one student. So while it's possible to ask one student without the group work or pair work part, as I mentioned before, they will produce better answers and be less nervous if you let them talk with friends first. And you've also seen it in your lesson plan models that we provide with some of your lesson plans. Another technique which is very useful is the ThinkPairShare procedural scaffolding technique. So first, students are guided to think to themselves for a moment, and then they share with a partner, and then they can share with the whole class. You may have seen this before in the interactions demonstration. The teacher in the beginning asked everyone to do a quick TPS about the woman's problem. What do you think it is? Think, pair, and share. Now I'd like to point out there are a few problems or a few issues that come up with the use of ThinkPairShare in microteachings, just to be aware of. The first problem would be that the students are not given enough time to think, so it's just like, think to yourself for 20 seconds. And that's rarely enough time to generate much thought, so usually thinking is at least a minute. So that can be one problem that we see in students' ThinkPairShare. Another problem is that sometimes that thinking time is not really enforced. In other words, they say, okay, you're going to think for a minute, talk to a partner, and then we'll share as a class. But students start talking to a partner right away. And that's when teachers need to have that classroom management skill to say, oh, okay, we're still thinking, because everyone needs that thinking time. So just something to keep in mind. This is really useful if you have kind of a complex idea or something that's going to involve a little bit of thinking time, and you'll get a lot better quality output from them. A related technique is the ThinkPairShare. As you can see, the one difference is we've added this stage of writing right in the middle. It's similar to TPS, but it has that additional skill. So they could think about it, and while they're thinking, they write about it, and then they pair up, and they can get a better answer, and then they can share their best answer with the whole class. Okay? So this is great for generating ideas, similar to TPS, and it's going to take a little bit of time, but it is certainly appropriate if you want them to provide more than a superficial answer to your more complex questions. And you may have seen this before, again in the interactions demonstration. There was a ThinkPairShare. It was kind of modified. So first, rather than thinking first, they were reading, and then they paired, and then they wrote, and then they shared. So it's a little different order. Any way you can combine these, as long as in the end they are sharing a better quality answer with the whole class. That's kind of the purpose here. And a lesser used technique, which is certainly useful, is the GroupPairSolo. So it's kind of the reverse of what you've seen before. Here we're starting in a group and we're leading to being alone. Okay, so they start working or discussing in groups, then they break off into pairs, and after that scaffolding, the students work alone. Okay, so this works well for projects that have smaller pieces, that you can break it up into smaller pieces, or breaking up a longer reading. So imagine you have students working on a group project, they can see it all together, and they can work together and benefit from each other, and perhaps decide who's going to work on which part, and then they break up in pairs, and then the pairs work on their specific part, and then you can have individuals consolidate what they've learned in an individual thinking and writing task, something like this. And the point is that by the time you get to the solo part, you have had the benefit of working in groups, you've had the benefit of working in pairs, and now you can think about it on your own. Whereas if we start with the solo part, it could be, for a large project, that's a little too much. So GroupPairSolo, feel free to try this in your microteaching. Just keep an eye on your time, because it can take quite a while. And another one that you've seen before is the guiding to complex questions. So students are asked questions which guide them to more complex answers. And you've seen this before back in your interactions demonstration from Welcome Week. An example was, what does M value? And in what situation could this value be a good thing? You know, so M valued money in the demonstration, in this activity, and in this context, that's not really the best value for everyone's survival, but valuing money could be really important in the context of the real world, where someone chooses a job that pays well because they have to provide for their family and this kind of thing. So this is a guiding question. Please keep in mind that this technique is appropriate for intermediates and above, so we don't want too many complex questions with your novices. And our teaching basics for this week, because remember, every practicum lesson has a little teaching basic at the end. And this week is nominating every student. Nominating every student, that means calling on each student by name. Nominate, from the Latin nom, or name. Okay? And this is important not simply because we need to involve everyone and talk to everyone, but also because sort of the opposite of this would be asking the whole class at once. And when you do that, you tend to get answers from the same people. And that can lead to what Scribner calls flying with the fastest. Also, when you ask a question to the whole class at once, it's kind of treating them as one student with the same mind and the same level, and you know, rather than taking into account individual differences. So that's a key one to keep in mind for your microteaching. And here's a quick microteaching 1 update. Because of our spring 2020 changed schedule, if you were a week 4 microteacher before, you are now teaching in week 5, so this should be the first week of traditional in-person classes. And if you were teaching in week 5 before, you are now teaching in week 6. Please make sure to check out your microteaching lineup in your Google Classroom for more details. Okay, and your task, your simple but useful teaching task for this week is you're going to create a short procedural scaffolding practice video. Okay, and what that means is, let me explain it to you. The goal is to practice using some of the techniques we just talked about. So you're going to record yourself doing one of 3 options, and you'll submit your video for feedback. Your first option, you can use your MT1 topic, whatever that is. You can plan some teacher talk and student talk to get some of these scaffolding techniques to work for you. How many techniques? 4 of the procedural scaffolding techniques, and you're gonna say the teacher talk and some sample student talk. And there will be a model of this, a short video to show you how to do it. Option number 2, you can use your group's listening text from the homework that you were assigned on M07. which is due M08. Same thing, use 4 of the techniques and provide the teacher talk and student talk for them based on your listening source homework. And check out the model for how to do that. And your third option, if you're interested in helping students do a speaking practice activity, we haven't really reached that in Microteaching yet, but if you would like to just try out using some materials, I've provided some materials that you can use for option 3. There are picture tasks and sort of grammar practice tasks, and you can just do the same thing, 4 interactions, teacher talk and student talk, and check out the model for that. Okay, here's a quick model of exactly how to do this activity. Okay, I'm going to use each of your 3 contexts to do this. Okay, so the first context is your general topic from MT1. Alright, now the one that I've chosen here is family. Just as a general topic, family. Something to keep in mind that Microteaching 1 is about teaching the novice level, so that means you can't use some of these, such as guiding questions, to complex questions, but you can use others. So here we go. General topic, procedural scaffolding. Okay. Model to practice. How many people are in your family? Everyone, how many people are in your family? Okay. And then I ask, Hey Yoon, how many people are in your family? And she says, 27. I don't know. Okay. And then, so she answers my question, and I respond to the meaning. Wow, 27, that's a big number. Okay. And, Hey Yoon, can you please ask Jihei the same question? Okay, so now we've begun the TSST. Here's one more. Remember, you're going to do 4 for your context. Okay, ask your partners. Tell me about a family member that you miss. Ask your partners. Who is a family member that you miss? Okay, you ask your partners. PW to S1, and I say, Carly, who did your partner talk about? And Carly says, my partner misses her grandmother. And I say, oh, I miss my grandmother too. Respond to meaning, okay? So that would be the first context, which is just a general topic. Okay, let's have a look at your second context. So your second context would be your listening source from M07 that's due on M08. Okay, so let's say, for example, you have listening source C. Well, what can I do with listening source C? Well, we might do a prediction question, okay, because if we just look at the picture, we can kind of begin to establish context with a kind of prediction question. So I say to the students, I say, all right, we're going to look at the picture, take 1 minute to think. 1 minute to think, MIC, repeat. After, what are you thinking about? You're thinking about what's the listening going to be about? What's the listening going to be about based on the picture, right? And then you're going to tell your partner what you think is coming in the listening. Tell your partner what you think the listening will be about. And then you'll share with the whole class. Then you'll share with everyone. Okay, so we take 1 minute to think, and I'm controlling the time because if they start talking too soon, they didn't get enough thinking time. Okay, then I say, for example, Blue, what did your partner have to say? Okay, so now we're sharing with the whole class. And Blue says, my partner thinks there's an evil doctor who's coming to give the girl nightmares, something like this. Okay, so that's TPS. And I might do a procedural scaffolding technique about the content of the listening. So the question that I'm giving is, why does the girl feel better in the end? So what I could say is, I could say, all right, ask your partners, why does the girl feel better in the end? And then I say, okay, Jihei, what did your partner say? Jihei says, my partner says she feels better because she doesn't want to go to the doctor. Okay, so that's pair work to S1. And now you're going to do the same thing with teacher talk and student talk for at least 4 techniques. Let's look at your last context. The last possible context that I have provided for you is some of these materials for grammar practice activities. Now this is a simple game. It's a simple game and really appropriate for procedural scaffolding. So here's the simple game. You have crystal ball cards and you have future time cards. So each student takes one future time card and one crystal ball card and tries to make a sentence that makes sense using will. Okay, so let's assume they have the instructions. One procedural scaffolding technique I can use is model to practice. Here we're really modeling the procedure of how to do this game, and we're modeling language at the same time. Okay, so let's say, for example, I choose by 2500, or by the year 2500, that's my time card, crystal ball, and I have cars. By the year 2500, all cars will fly. Okay, so I've made my sentence and it's also modeling. Now you try. Okay, model to practice. In this case, we're modeling instructions. Okay, so that's one thing that I can do. Another thing we might try is, one of my favorites, of course, is pair work or group work to S1. So I could say, Kyungmin, what did Hyo-sun say? And then Hyo-sun said, next year, people will be rich. And I say, that doesn't really make sense. Which people? So I'm asking a follow-up question. And she says, people in my family will be rich. And I say, wow, that's interesting. Okay. So that leads me to a guiding to complex. This is intermediate level, I can do it. So I might say, all right, everyone. Now, we're gonna combine guiding to complex with TPS. So we're gonna think for 1 minute. If you know that you will be rich in 1 year, how does that change what you do today? One more time. If you know that you'll be rich in 1 year, how will that change what you do today? Okay, we think for 1 minute, we pair and share with the class. And then I choose one person and I say, Kyungmin, what did your partner say? And she says, my partner says, if you are rich, you know you will be rich in 1 year, then today you will be lazy. I don't know. Anyway, so this is just to model how you might do this. You can choose any of these contexts, and please upload your videos. Remember, only I can see them, and each of you will get personalized, individualized feedback. So good luck, and please reach out to your practicum teacher if you have any questions on how to do this activity. Remember, it's only classwork, so it's not worth points. It's just participation in the class. Okay? Try to get it in there by the time that it's due, but if it's not, please don't worry. Nobody is going to fail the class because of this classwork activity. All right, good luck and see you soon.